Hey guys, how you going? Hope you're all doing very well. This evening I'm going to be doing another movie review. This movie is a horror film from Canada, English language, released in the year 2019, directed by Jay Baruchel, and this film is called Random Acts of Violence. So Random Acts of Violence is about a comic book called Slasher Man. This is a series of comics that are very horrifyingly gory, has a strong fan base, but also a lot of people that criticise it because they believe this causes vulnerable people to turn into violent people. And so the creator of this comic book, he's copying a lot of criticism, but also a lot of accolades, and he wants to get rid of this. He basically says that he's obsessed with this series, he wants to break free and create something different with his life, but he needs that one idea to cap off the series. And he decides that he's going to go on a road trip, a tour, with his girlfriend, his business partner, and also his agent. They're going to do meet and greets, they're going to have interviews on radios, and this is where he hopes that he gets the inspiration for that final idea. But unfortunately they get more than they bargained for, because there is a serial killer following them that is killing people in the same vein as the people depicted in the comic. So this main character is going to have to try and delve into his own work if he is to try and prevent that body count from getting higher. So whether or not he can is something you're going to have to find out for yourself, because that's as far as I'm going with my synopsis. Now my thoughts on Random Acts of Violence. This has been on the horror streaming service Shudder for the longest time, but for the reason is it's a slasher film. I didn't really want to go and see it any sooner. Now I have gravitated to slashers a lot more recently than in the past, but I'm not going to go out of my way to watch one. So when I saw that this was a slasher, it's been on my list for a very long time, but I've just had other movies to watch. But then on Friday night I thought, why not give this a shot? I'm not really in the mood to see something thought-provoking, so hopefully this is going to be worth my time. And at the end of the day, I will say that this movie exceeded expectations. This was actually a lot better than your standard slasher film. This was not a slasher film that was simply emulating what Jason Voorhees and Freddy Krueger did. And it's a slasher film that has a lot more maturity and actually make you think about how we see violence. And not only violence, but those that commit acts of violence. And so this is a film that's not making you feel guilty for liking all the bloodshed, but it is a movie that poses a question as to why we idolise killers and why we forget about the victims that have made these killers so recognizable. And so it's a society, a black mark against society, and it's a very disturbing mark against society, is that why do we gravitate to the killers instead of the victims? And so this movie is trying to give you an insight into the victims, but it's also begging that question, as I said, without going into melodrama and without going into a guilt trip. It just gives the movie a little bit more of a platform than you'd get with simple slasher films. And so this is the reason why I'm not a great fan of slasher, because they are very empty. But Random Acts of Violence actually has a strong, mature response, which I really appreciated. It also gives you the aspect of violence on screen, not only in comic books but on screen. The violence as to can it turn vulnerable people into maniacs? Life imitating art and art imitating life. And so it has been an age-old debate, but this movie throws out that debate in a way that gives the movie even more of a three-dimensional response. And so that was all very good, but pushing that commentary on violence aside, I still thought as a slasher film, it was absolutely fantastic. I thought the set pieces were incredibly creepy. This is a very unnerving film, and that was down to the fact that the cinematography was so vivid in its colouring. It's a fever-pitch nightmare. The killer wasn't overly creative, but the way that the killer moved, the way that the mannerisms of this killer, it was just really, really unnerving, very creepy, and I found myself squirming in quite a few occasions. This is a very violent film, but what got me by surprise the most was the atmospheric character that creates, that just suffocates all the air out of you. And as the movie goes on, it gets darker and darker and darker, and it just adds up to a really shocking finale that you will not forget anytime soon. So I thought as though the overall platform of this movie was set through that thought-provoking material, but it has a very strong formula as far as the generic slasher film is concerned. So the way these people are killed I thought was fantastic. Thought the characters were fairly relatable. You've got very well-known actors, Jesse Williams from Grey's Anatomy, Jordana Brewster. You've also got Jay Baruchel himself, who they play the characters in this film. The main character, Jesse Williams, is a very torn individual. He is becoming obsessed with what he is writing and creating, and so I thought as though he was trying to separate reality from fantasy, and that was very difficult for him to do. And the people that were criticising him because they believe that he's too violent was something that I could relate to, is because they say I'm a maniac for loving horror films, but that's not the way it is. And so people have to take responsibility for their own actions instead of blaming it on what they're actually seeing. And so the vulnerability of some people can be moulded into something horrific, and this is what the film does, and therefore you're never quite sure how this movie is going to finish. And so that unpredictability is there within a very predictable subgenre, which is something that I absolutely loved. And so it's a runtime that I thought went through very briskly, and overall it's a a slasher film that I enjoyed a lot more than I was anticipating. It's really well done. The script, it was fairly funny in some areas that I really liked, and it just felt like a much more mature slasher film that I'm sure slasher fans are going to really gravitate to. So it's a lot better than I was expecting. Go out there and see it. I'm going to give this film 3.5 stars. Alright guys, that's it for my review. Hope you enjoyed it. Till next time, keep watching movies, and I'll see you later.